Sorry about the late start. I see a few people joining now. I see Bob just entered the room. Maybe we can do a quick check of quorum for the TAC and begin.
Yeah, sure thing. Let's see. Bob, Ava, Krobe, Josh, Luke, which means we're missing Avishek and Dan. But that 5 is sufficient for quorum. And given that we're late, let's go ahead and get started. We got a packed agenda today. All right, first up, we have an update from the Securing Critical Projects Working Group, and I see Amir on. I don't know whether Amir, I guess you're taking the lead, or Jeff. I don't know which one of you is taking the mic, but either one of you, go ahead, please.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, I believe Jeff is going to share a slide that has our updates.
I'm not able to see anything. I don't know if that's just me.
Okay. No, I'm not able to see it either.
Oh, let me figure this out.
Ah,
There we go.
beautiful.
There you go.
Can you see it
Okay.
now?
Yep.
Okay,
Looks
great.
perfect. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep this short and sweet, less than 5 minutes, unless there's questions. Happy to answer questions. So our main effort, identify the set of about 100 most critical projects. And we have about 100 there in air quotes because it's not a magic number. It's just an order of magnitude. So a lot of times people get hung up on the number, like how much we're going for, but that's about the size that we're going for with this process. That's somewhat manual. So we can't do like thousands, and we can do more than like 10. So let's do around there. So we have a process for coming up with a new list that the community has decided on, or that the working group has decided on. And this is a little bit different than our previous, method, in that we're going to be trying to get more and more suggestions from outside the working group for project packages or projects that we want to consider. And in order to handle all these suggestions, we're going to build a little bit of automation. So this is going to be instead of like a Google form, we're going to actually use a GitHub PR, action PR, GitHub PR, and then an action is going to run when that's merged, which will automate the data collection, so that we can end up with a big, essentially spreadsheet or CSV that shows all of the data that as a working group we're going to want to look at when we want to make the determination. And as humans, when we look at the data, we know kind of like the nuances there. Like we don't put our full determination on criticality score versus download count. We want to be able to see it and make a determination as a working group on whether we think that project is critical or not, and it gets included into the set. So this is the main process. Right now, the status is we're kind of blocked on getting this automation done. So this is something that's kind of came up after, maybe in the late summer, that we wanted to use. So that's being worked on. The criticality score tool itself, under the other efforts, it needed to be updated to be run as a one-off instead of being run like as a cron job on a large set. So that's so on the status on the identify, we're working on automation. Once it's ready, we're going to be able to open it up and start getting these suggestions. Again, the criticality score has a brand new algorithm that already is in, and then more recently it's been updated to be integrated into the automation. And other projects that have had updates is All-Star. Currently, we're working on getting a blog out, but we've talked to some of our users and have found the one that we're going to talk to be a co-author on a blog. So those are kind of the main updates on the working group. Amir, do you have anything you want to add first, or do you want to open up to questions?
I would just throw in one quick little tidbit. I definitely plan on going into it in more detail with the TAC and OpenSSF. we went ahead and using that first round of that first iteration of identifying projects, we at OSTIF went through that and basically created a short list of around 50 projects that we would recommend for security audit because they have never been audited, and factoring in, all the things that we've been working on as a work group, just to serve as another data point for helping kind of hone in on the focus on certain projects that need help. So I definitely do plan on having more information on that soon for everyone, but just wanted to give a little preview on that. There is another data point there of projects that we are recommending for security audit moving forward. But besides that, I don't have any other updates and would love to I think we have a couple of minutes for questions if there are any.
Great, thanks to both of you. Any questions for Amir or Jeff? Josh.
So this is cool, thank you. I'm curious about dependent or dependencies of the critical packages, because are those going to be special in any way? Because obviously they're critical path, I assume.
Yeah, so we'll take the dependency account data information from the Harvard census results as well. So I think we're looking at how to get that at scale for the suggestions, but otherwise it'll be more of a need to manually look at it as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Ava.
2 questions. I'll start with one closest to what Josh said. For the criticality score, maybe I missed it, and I'm sorry if I did. I had to deal with the contractor real quick. Could you give a quick summary of what's different in the updated algorithm? And the second question, you mentioned reaching out to other communities. How are you approaching that so that folks can kind of have a sense of which communities are engaged, which ones we might want to encourage?
Sorry, I'm gonna kind of punt on both of those, but I will get the link. There's the criticality score algorithm update is pretty long, but I'll post the link in the notes. And for the reaching out, Jacques Chester's mostly kind of spearheading that, and he's not here. Do you have any answers, Amir, there?
No, I just know that the criticality score has undergone some updates, and Caleb and everyone there has done a fine job kind of fine tuning and updating it, but I don't know exactly what the changes are.
Okay.
And then regarding the second question, yeah, Jacques has definitely been helping with that, and we're just trying to leverage the work group to engage, the greater open source community and folks who are interested in collaborating.
I think those are both great changes. Thanks for working on them. I look forward to seeing the updates in the link you added here.
Of course.
Thanks.
Awesome. All right, great. If there's no more questions, thank you both. Next on the agenda, we have Michael Scavetta with a discussion around Alpha Omega, kind of the year-end report and some specific questions he had for the TAC. So with that, Michael, up to you. See your screen? I can't hear you though.
Can you hear me? I might be having mic problems. Well,
Yep.
This is Michael Windsor, but I don't hear Michael Scavetta yet. So
There you go. Are we good
there
now?
you go.
Cool.
Please take it away.
Hi everyone. We're Michael and Michael. We've been partnering on the Alpha Omega project. Pretty excited about today's sort of news and non-news, if you will. So Michael, why don't you move us forward and I'll figure out what slides you put together. Right, exactly. So we had planned to be sharing the annual report with the broader audience today, but we had to delay it. There's a few things that we're still putting together. I believe all the members of the TAC should have a copy of that, and we'd love to hear any feedback you have on it. We will pushing out the annual report once a few sort of checks have cleared and signatures have been achieved and certain things that we're working on. So should be soon. We'll give you an update. Next slide. Oh, this is the best news. Michael, you should take this one.
Yeah, so core team, so we've been trying to hire for quite a while. I'm super happy to announce that we got an accept for the security engineer. I am keeping my fingers crossed that we'll also have an accept soon for the security researcher. The engineer should start mid-November-ish, which means that particularly on the Omega side, we'll be able to move faster. We've made more progress on the Alpha side, but we want to round that out with Omega.
Yep.
So what this means is, core engineering and security research to find critical vulnerabilities in critical open source at scale. So on the Alpha side, so we have 5 engagements with 5 different organizations. All of these are public now. So Node has been going on for a while. Rust got their money August, I think. They've had their money for a bit. Eclipse, PSF, and jQuery are all awaiting the funds. That is, while we've announced that publicly that we're doing it, one of the reasons that we're delaying the annual report is they haven't actually gotten the money yet, and that's we don't want to jump the gun and congratulate ourselves on a job well done when we haven't done the thing. PSF is just waiting on final contract signatures. But what this really means is that by the end of the calendar year, we will have spent roughly $2 million on these Alpha engagements. So we're pretty happy, and we're really optimistic to see the results of that start to trickle in month by month with annual reports from each of these organizations. Node's been doing it since May, I believe, and Eclipse made some early progress. On the Omega side, I talked about this last time, but we released the tool chain. We found, I think, 11 vulnerabilities so far. I think 8 of them are fixed already. We want that to be an order of magnitude or more larger once the engineer and researcher are on board. So,
and I think with the tool chain being released, it's open source, it's in the repo. We would love to see people A, trying it out, and then B, contributing to it if you have other thoughts and things like, it's very much intended to be an open source thing. And we'd like to see the tool chain start getting used in more places, even sort of as a pre-check or whatever, to see how things happen. So anyway, very keen to have people taking a look at it and poking at it and kicking the tires.
Okay, so we made some process improvements, or we're planning to make some process improvements, and pretty much the rest of the deck is about like our future leaning, what we want to do. So real quick and this is specifically about how Alpha projects are chosen, because we realize it's a little bit opaque and not a lot of connective tissue between TAC and us. So we're making 4, let's say, process changes here. First, we're going to be super explicit about no self-dealing. We're not going to invest. We're not going to do VS Code. We're not going to do TensorFlow. We're not going to do any project that is essentially governed or has a strong perception of governance by a funder for Alpha Omega. I think it should be obvious that has been our intention all along. We haven't done it, but we're going to make that crystal clear. Second, we are going to inform TAC a few weeks before any Alpha engagements going forward. So that way we don't want you to
No surprises.
learn about it. Yeah. We also want to have strategic discussions with y'all to see what's on your mind in terms of, if IoT was like super important to you, you guys were seeing trends or whatever that would suggest that we should be thinking about IoT as part of Alpha in particular. We would like to have that in a more in a less ad hoc manner. And then finally, transparency on funding rationale. Like when we invest in, so of all the investments that we've had, so Rust, Eclipse, PSF are kind of in the same bucket. Node is kind of its own bucket, and then jQuery is definitely a different bucket in terms of like a web framework as opposed to like a platformy kind of thing. And we think it would be value in being more transparent in why we chose those. Number one, to hold us accountable so that we're not making really silly investments, but also to explain that there is somewhat of a method to the madness in the types of projects that we choose. In particular, when we choose things that aren't obviously on the critical projects list, like most of the things that we've done are, but for the ones that aren't, well, why? So, Michael, over to you.
Perfect. Yeah. So one of the things that's been great about the process so far is we've been, making interesting mistakes, learning along the way, and starting to figure out what works and what can work better. And we start out very much ad hoc, and I've learned that we need to operationalize things. Again, kudos and thanks to Anna from Citi, who's been a tremendous aid to sort of operationalizing our processes around how we give money, how we accept money, how we report it. And so we really want to go from sort of doing this by hand to having a little bit more process in place around how we do it, and to document that process for ourselves. Again, so sort of what we do can scale without sort of hand-to-hand combat at every stage. And so that's normal, I think, going from sort of, early stage startup mindset to slightly more operationalized, pretty normal stuff. The other thing is that we're sort of thinking about, as we're entering into sort of a second year of like, well, what does it mean when we fund a particular organization towards a security outcome? And we really want it to be sort of a process of seeding security culture, security priorities within an organization, helping it grow, and then helping it become a part of the normal business operations, right? And if you think about it, a lot of these organizations have historically had sort of security as just another attribute of work that's getting done, but it's not something that's sort of a line item on the budget per se, or necessarily sort of a deep cultural norm. A lot of these places didn't have somebody whose job it was to be in charge of security or something like that. We're hoping that over time we can get the organizations and the fundraising and the budgeting and other things to become one that treats that as a normal part of the business and has explicit budget management for it and fundraising towards it. So it's not that we don't want to keep sort of bootstrapping and starting these things, but we're at this point not thinking that AO becomes a sort of permanent endowment of security work across all these foundations. We think of it as sort of helping bootstrap culture change and process change and security change across the organization.
Bob, your hands up.
Yeah, I guess looking for maybe a little projection, and not trying to hold you to any certain duration here, but like when we say like shifting that over time, I think, how long do you anticipate that being? Like, are we talking a year, 2 years, 5 years? Like, have you in your conversations with the various foundations, I'm just kind of curious as to when do they need to see value and ultimately raise that priority in terms of their overall budgets, and ultimately kind of wean off of the AO funding. I'm just curious what the timelines sort of
I don't think we know. I mean, like, we're still at the stage of like, we should do something like that. Let's see how it goes. We certainly haven't had any of those sort of deeper conversations. We're just being very open with how we think about it. I imagine that, it's probably measured in years, but not 5. I'm going to be like, again, I don't want to hold anybody to any set of expectations here, ourselves or the other organizations that we're about to go to, talk to, but like, year 1, we come in with seed capital. It basically makes it possible to even start doing things in security like that. Year 2, we're here again supporting it, but we're hoping that other organizations that have a vested interest in the outcome of the funding sources they already rely on are like, yep, we should help that too. And essentially more of a matching model. And then possibly year 3, we'd love to reach a state of independence, but maybe it takes longer than that. So like, literally that's about as far as we've thought it through. And I want to emphasize to everybody who we are working with today and will work in the future, we're very much open-minded here. We want to try and figure out what the right model is. And it may well be that that's not the right model. It may be that AO is a right funding channel for these types of things. I don't think it is right now, but we'll see. So again, the spirit of experimentation, which is let's see what works, let's see how we can effectively create, more secure, projects and foundations and processes across the thing through money. So that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. I think just to add to that, I think the goal for this and next year is like show value, show the impact. Like if we're not having the outcomes that we really desire, then it doesn't matter who's paying for it. It's the wrong approach.
Right.
If we are having amazing results, then it makes it easier.
And we, one of the things we talk about in the annual report is that, one of the things that's made for success is we've been pretty relaxed about what success looks like. We're like, look, here's some money, do some security stuff, tell us about it, and then make us want to do more, right? Like if the incentives for the receiving organization are such that they want to get more money next year, right? They're going to want to show impact and value, and that's what we want too. And we're very open-minded to how people talk about and reason about the success of the work. So I think the alignment of incentives has worked out very well for, getting things done and figuring it out along the way when nobody really knows what they're doing right now. So that's okay.
Yeah, all that is great, and I think the experimentation makes sense to me. I guess the reason why I'm asking the question kind of gets back to the conversation around identity of the foundation, value proposition of what we offer to various other entities within the broader ecosystem, and kind of distilling your work after maybe next year and kind of saying like these are the patterns that we've seen work really well, and these are the ones that we've seen fall flat on our face, and net that out, I think would be definitely of interest when we get to 12 months from now.
We've talked about this in some other contexts too. Is like, is this a franchisable model, right? Can we work with other industry vertical sections and foundations and organizations and say, here's you may have a community of things that you care about. Here's a pattern for, starting from nothing, bring some money into the conversation, and then bootstrapping up across a different set of stakeholders, to achieve that security outcome. So, like we said, experiments. We'll see what happens.
Great, thank you.
Michael, you want to grab this?
Sure.
One?
So other things that are top of mind is particularly more on the Omega side, at least some of these, so there are commercial tools and vendors out there that do really good work, and that, we should leverage those as well where possible. So, obviously we're using CodeQL, thank you to GitHub. We're using SNCC, thank you to SNCC. We want to, we leverage Open Refactory, thank you to Open Refactory. We want to kind of make that more operationalized and have a playbook there that works. It's going to take a little while because we actually need to get the folks on the ground to be doing this stuff kind of day to day, but we think there's opportunity there. Assertions for validation activities. So somebody mentioned in chat, like, where are we posting the vulnerabilities we find? Well, the vulnerabilities we find are just one end of the value I think that we provide. So if we scan a thing and we see that there's actually nothing bad that we can find in the thing, that fact itself is valuable to others, and we want to be able to provide that in a way that's consumable. In the past, we experimented with doing that as a security review. The problem is security reviews themselves they're human readable, not really machine readable too much. We want to play around with this space and see what makes sense to provide and we think like the assertion model might work, where someone can just pick up and say, what do you know about component X? We also want to figure out how to engage more effectively with small and tiny projects. So every project that we've worked on, particularly on the alpha side, has been these kind of larger or very well-established projects. If we wanted to go after a single developer project, which was really critical to the community, what does that even look like? We can't just show up with a bag of money and say, go hire somebody. It probably wouldn't work. And then I think, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so like we're super happy that the SOS sort of .dev project has become part of the Alpha Omega family, but we've been very light touch right now. It's really operating exactly the way it was before. But I think to Michael's previous question about how can we engage effectively small, tiny projects, SOS.dev is doing that today. It's allowing individuals to come in and connect to any particular project they want to make improvements on, either finding and or fixing vulnerabilities. We want to do more of that. So we'll work with the current SOS.dev stakeholders to really bring them into the family, and then see how we can sort of expand that impact and even just increase the awareness. It's not something that very many people are aware of right now.
So question for TAC, what's on the top of your minds? And not putting anybody on the spot, we probably don't have time to have a big discussion on this, but we would like an answer to this question. Like, what are the things that you're worried about? What areas, what things are we not looking at that we should? et cetera, et cetera. So coming soon. So the annual report will be out as soon as it's out. We're hoping sooner rather than later. We are starting to think about our 2023 plan. We're going to continue to experiment. And we have a community meeting tomorrow. Michael, we have a community meeting tomorrow morning.
We have a community meeting tomorrow morning. Michael, do we have
We
a
do.
community meeting tomorrow morning?
We do.
Fantastic.
So welcome you there. We'll be chatting more about this stuff. Thanks everybody for the time. Any questions?
Yeah, questions?
If you think of anything, you can throw them in chat too, or the Alpha Omega Slack or whatever. Find us.
All right. Thanks as always, Michael, for putting the get together. Thanks for having us chat. Looking forward to hear more. Yep.
All right, thanks to you both. All right, next on the agenda, we have a discussion around a proposal coming from the Securing Software Repositories Working Group around potentially making a recommendation to the governing board to fund a help desk for MFA resets. And we have Ashley Ellis Pierce from Shopify, who's going to be giving a presentation on this. So Ashley, over to you.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. Sorry, let me go back. So I sent out an email last week with a proposal doc that has the full details for this proposal. But here I'll summarize the proposal for you. And I've also included some extra details in the presentation to address some of the feedback and questions that were raised in this proposal. This is an initiative that Jacques Chester, who many of you may know, has been working on. And it was worked through and approved by the Securing Software Repositories Working Group. But since Jacques is out of office for the next month getting married, I'm presenting this in his stead. As I said, my name is Ashley Pierce. I'm a staff developer at Shopify on the Ruby dependency security team, where I work with Jacques on things like increasing MFA adoption and Ruby dependencies. And I'm also a maintainer of Ruby Gems, Ruby software repositories. At the end of this presentation, I'll ask for questions, comments, etc. But I just want to give the caveat up front that I'll do my best for answering them, but some of them may be questions that we'll need to save for Jacques' return or take back to the working group. So to start out, I want to give you a little background on the why. What problem are we trying to solve? Well, I believe David Wheeler actually sent out the most recent Sonatype State of the Software Supply Chain report to the mailing list last week, where Sonatype mentions that over the last few years, the rate of attacks on software supply chains have been increasing on average 742% year over year. And it calls the recent addition of MFA to some of these repositories a key improvement in this area. So MFA is essential to software repository security. NPM, PyPy, and Ruby Gems have all recently made MFA mandatory for small cohorts of package authors. But MFA requires complex and risky account reset support. This is a choke point for expanding MFA policy coverage. If we require all maintainers of all packages to have MFA enabled, then we'll be increasing the number of support requests on an already overworked small group of volunteers who maintain these software repositories. So to that end, we want to create a shared help desk for software repositories focused on MFA reset support. And this would also include a small program of contracted projects to create the help desk and then integrate software repositories into it. So far, Ruby Gems and PyPy have expressed interest in being a part of this help desk. And we imagine that as it grows, other repositories might want to join as well. There would, of course, be some risks with creating a shared help desk. It would need to be well defended and carefully staffed. With MFA in general, social engineering of account resets is a key risk. Currently, each ecosystem has their own processes for dealing with this with varying levels of formality. So with a full-time professional on board, we can invest in formalizing the reset process with higher effort checks ability to make sure it's robust for every ecosystem. And then just the fact that this help desk person has access to multiple systems would, of course, make them a high value target for attack. We can mitigate this by making their access extremely limited, requiring MFA on their account, restricting access to particular hardware, audit logs, and other countermeasures to ensure that their access is not abused. I believe that given the countermeasures I've just listed and the added security of having one firmly, highly vetted reset policy, as opposed to different ecosystems having their own informal, possibly less secure policies, that it is possible to do a shared help desk securely. For instance, by limiting the access of the help desk staff, it could limit the impact of a compromised help desk to just the help desk itself not being able to reset passwords, in which case we'd fall back to the same system we use now. Repositories volunteers would step up and resume their roles during the outage. So there are more details on the security risks and considerations within the doc. I know based on the conversations already happening there that how best to secure the help desk will be a topic of a lot of discussion. But I want to focus here on the fact that at this stage, we're discussing whether creating the help desk would be beneficial and should be funded, not necessarily unpacking all the details on how best to implement it. We can hammer out those details later in conjunction with OpenSSF staff. If we think it's possible to create a shared help desk that, given the right security measures, doesn't increase risk, then we can move this forward and focus on the how later. So I mentioned funding, so let's get into some of the numbers. For consistency, these numbers were generated using the same figures that some other working groups have used when deciding how much it costs OpenSSF to hire one person. I think it's very likely that a support person will not actually have a $300K salary, but we thought it best to be consistent with other similar budget proposals. We also included some overhead and salary increases here, and the budget is done for 4 years. Since those salary numbers are for one person, we then need to consider when we might need to hire more people. The two factors that would determine that are how many requests can one person handle each week or each month, and how much will the rate of requests grow as MFA requirements are increased. Since I don't have a crystal ball, I can't know anything for sure, but I've used information from Shopify and RubyGems to get some ballpark estimates. I reached out to Shopify's account integrity support team, and I got the estimate from them that each one of Shopify's support people can handle about 300 of these kind of MFA account verification requests per month. Currently, RubyGems receives 20 requests per month and PyPy receives 40. Neither of these ecosystems currently require all of their users to have MFA enabled, and so costs will grow as they increase their MFA requirements. For RubyGems, about 15% of the user base currently has MFA enabled. If one day 50% were required to have MFA enabled and the number of support tickets grew linearly to the number of users with MFA enabled, that would be about 70 requests per month. If we apply that same logic to PyPy, then at the 50% of accounts enabled, we might expect 140 requests per month. And then you can see those numbers for 100% as well. So what we can take away from this is at current state, we have a lot of room to add additional ecosystems or increase MFA requirements without increasing costs. If we want to both add ecosystems and up MFA requirements, we'll need to be wary that our costs will increase, as well as we might need to add additional help desk support. Again, these numbers are estimates based on the limited data that I have available, so we can't say for sure, but the takeaway here is that to keep our costs stable, we just need to take those two factors into account, ecosystem size and MFA requirements, before determining if we have room in the budget to add another ecosystem. All right, so that was the personnel costs, and then now on to the project costs. There are costs for the contract to create the help desk and then to get each ecosystem onboarded. This would vary depending on the ecosystem, as they're all going to have different difficulty levels depending on their APIs, what tools they use, etc. But these are some of the rough costs. So if we add up the projected personnel costs and then the max estimate for onboarding 5 different software repositories, then that will give us a total of $2.1 million to be spent over 4 years. And so to summarize, we're hoping to create a shared help desk to be able to unlock an increase in MFA adoption for software ecosystems, which is a necessary step to increasing the security of the software supply chain. I again want to reiterate that we're focusing on whether creating a shared help desk is beneficial, doable, and should be given budget, not necessarily on the implementation details. So with that lens, are there any questions or feedback we want to discuss? I'll open it up.
Yeah, there's been several comments in the chat, but before we jump into there, just one note that if we do get to the point of a vote, we have had 2 TAC members drop off. So Dan and Crow have had to leave. So with that, any folks that want to ask a live question? Otherwise, Ashley, I guess I would point you at some of the chat dialogue, maybe to start.
I guess my precursor question will be, where's the best place to take the longer discussion that this chat suggests we're likely to need?
That's a good question. I think the Securing Software Repositories Working Group is a good place to take them. And then we can also, follow up over email as well, if that works.
Great. Yeah, I think some of this will need to at least be echoed on email so that folks who can't make that meeting time can also be aware of the conversation and comment on it.
Gotcha. Jumping into, I'm just gonna go through some of the questions I see in chat. So one of the most recent ones, how is this done today? What does Ruby Gems do to verify that I'm not evil Mike when I try to reset my MFA? And I believe I've seen some other questions about, how we do the resets without requiring like government data and stuff like that. I know every ecosystem is going to require something different. Some of the checks that Ruby Gems do are a lot of making sure that they have access to certain types of accounts like emails, GitHub accounts. Some of them may have their API keys for their Ruby Gems accounts still stored on their local machines. So it is not checking a government ID. It's not how it's done currently.
Glad to hear that. Thank you.
So I think my hand is up and nobody else seems to be ahead of me, so I'll just jump in. I'm very supportive of the goal here and the intent. I think it's I think there's a real problem of operational security done in a sort of artisanal way that doesn't scale well. I feel like trying to do this with one person on one dimension of the problem is a great way to start, but it's going to be really it's not enough in some ways. And I think that I would actually encourage you to think about this from a sort of slightly bigger perspective, because the overhead of having people, you need to get to more people, then there's more stuff to do. Great, but actually you need an operation here. It's not I don't think it'd be great to have a single person doing this. I think it needs to be part of an operation, and then there's a whole bunch of process, and that person's security needs to be well managed and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that fans out from here that you can look at how large organizations like Google manage their identity and their two-factor auth and multi-factor auth, and even their onboarding of a new person with identity and that. Those are all important jobs, and I feel like that's sort of all the under the water stuff that you're talking about on this very large iceberg of a problem. So
yeah, I think that's a really good call out, Michael. As I mentioned a bit with like the contract budgets as well, a large part of this project is going to be creating a process, a system for how to manage these. And again, in making that a secure system that takes into account how best to secure these repositories as opposed to, each one doing their own one-off. So I definitely agree that it needs to be a full operation, a system, as opposed to just like giving the work to one person and saying, go for it. We definitely need like operations and playbooks that will guide that person's work. And I think that also addresses a bit of some of the questions as well about if that person goes on like holiday leave and things like that I've seen in the chat. I'm not sure, how what it'll work with having a backup person on the help desk, but we can definitely say for sure that we won't be relying on one person's knowledge, that the knowledge would be operationalized. Brian, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, 2 big questions on this, or comments. First is, I'm a bit naive on kind of reset processes, I'll admit, but I'm really keen to see how much can be automated as possible as a way to drive down kind of this, both the support burden and costs and everything. The way that Let's Encrypt automated the validation, at a perhaps lower bar than perhaps other processes, but automated the validation of ownership of domains to the degree that it became acceptable for everyone to accept their certificates. It was truly really remarkable, right? They brought the cost of issuing a certificate basically down to zero. So we'd be really keen to see, are there process ways to validate identity, or to have folks pre-register a third factor auth, which I see happen in some places where MFA tokens are used. And would that investment then of $1.5 million over 4 years be perhaps better spent on tools to help that automation that could then be pushed to all the repos to run in a more decentralized way, rather than depending upon kind of a fragile set of humans at the center. And my second comment is, as the GM for OpenSSF, as the person who'd be responsible for hiring and then delivering a service like this, it makes me nervous, right? I feel like I'd rather structure this, rather than looking at this as somebody that we hire, or two people we hire, one to be support and one to be backup or working on tools or whatever. I'd really like to find a contractor who would deliver to a set of expectations or a set of objectives, a set of deliverables, even on an ongoing basis, which is kind of like what Let's Encrypt has with ISRG, right? ISRG, the group that manages the Let's Encrypt service, who SigStore is talking about managing the key server, those sorts of things that are perhaps better to sub out to an organization that has an ops team and an operational, kind of muscle and operational kind of setup in a way that, we just don't have out of the box at the team at OpenSSF.
I don't see any other hands up, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if anybody else had any final questions on this. I have a comment on this as well, but I want to make sure I don't dominate the conversation here. So I think, as Brian and Michael both indicated, I think I'm supportive of getting the resets done so that we see communities able to adopt more of this, whether it's a single person to be hired on OpenSSF staff versus funding that could flow to the requisite kind of parent foundations. I guess my questions are more in the how rather than in the, like, does this make sense for the OpenSSF to support in some way? So I think the governing board, in my guess, and I would look to any other GB members that are on the line here to comment here as well. I suspect that the GB would want to have a little bit more detail on alternatives and hows and a recommendation on where to spend the money versus just a thumbs up, sounds like a good idea, but if there's not enough meat on that proposal, then they're likely just to bounce it right back, and we burn time and cycle going through all of that. And so I would say, in my view, if we can get a concrete list of questions, both from this chat as in this discussion, as well as from a set of follow-up discussions to be had, I think trying to drive the list of alternatives back to the governing board so that we have a preferred option, but we considered these other alternatives, I think probably is the most expeditious way forward. But looking at Brian Fox or Brian Bellendorf for apologies for any other GB members that I'm not seeing on the line here as I scan through quickly.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that makes sense for me. We'll take some of these questions about more specifics on how we can get this implemented, possibly with either with one person or with a more operationalized approach, and we'll take that back to the working group and follow up with that.
Great.
Awesome.
Well, thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.
All right. Last on the agenda today is, as you guys are, all the folks are hopefully aware, we have an upcoming meeting next Friday in person at the end of the LF Member Summit, a joint meeting between the TAC and the governing board. We have Sam Ramji, who's on the line with us today, who I asked if he would be willing to maybe give kind of some framing thoughts as we kind of prepare for that discussion, to help us all kind of orient ourselves in terms of what the objectives are, as well as things that are in scope or out of scope. A meeting with as I'm sure he will say, a meeting with that many people in it is probably not really even a meeting. It's probably more of a herding cats exercise. So I asked him to maybe take a few minutes and kind of walk us through some high-level points that will hopefully make that time extremely effective and achieve the goals that we have. So, Sam, over to you.
Great, thank you. Can you see these slides?
Yep.
My computer seems to be having something of a conniption on the video, so I'm gonna try to get the video functioning, but I don't want to use that as a blocker for communicating. Okay, there we go. HA these days means having 2 video cameras, so this is my backup camera. Happy Tuesday, everybody. As some of you may celebrate, it's the first day of the month, so happy Rabbit if you do that. We have a strategy day coming up on November 11th. It's 2 Fridays from now, so T-10. That's kind of exciting and kind of terrifying, but I think it can be really great for all of us because we have huge ambitions. I've had the opportunity to interview some TAC members, some GB members. I'm making my way through several more this week. If you have an email thread open with me, be convinced that I will get back to you by about 11 o'clock this morning. To get your voice as a stakeholder into our pre-reads and into the agenda. But more broadly, what are we going to do? We're going to have a bunch of decisions. We're going to try to think together, and we're going to try to come through this with a lot of convergence so that 2023 looks good. I'll let you read the slide, but to define what we're trying to do on Strategy Day, we are going to collectively make decisions that make success in the mission likely. And we are going to collectively defer the decisions that we don't absolutely need to make yet. So hopefully these bullets are relatively clear. We want to make sure we have clear agreement on strategic intent for 2023, clear priorities for execution in 2023. We have a lot of things that we can do. And I think everybody I've spoken with is excited and also a little bit nervous about our ability to execute everything that all of us have imagined over the last couple of years. So priorities for 23 will let us build the right organization to make sure that this all happens. So what are our non-priorities and non-goals for 2023? Again, some things we may have to explicitly defer and say, let's get those done in 24. It's going to be really helpful for people in this group. You have the expertise of what this work actually takes. The TAC is close to the metal, as opposed to close to the management by design. So, what is the rough scope and scale of effort required from OpenSSF staff needed to support in 2023? Great example from the Michaels earlier. It's taken them months to hire high quality security program managers, researchers still TBD. This is hopefully going to be easier with the current macro environment and with companies freeing up staff, putting them back onto the market. We may have a good opportunity to do some hiring, but this is going to be very challenging. We want to make sure that we're designing a great organization that supports everybody here, no matter who leaves and joins their job in the member companies. What is it the OpenSSF needs to have at the core? And then finally, by the end of the day on November 11th, we want to know that where more detailed plans are needed to approve 2023 budget, that there's a committed owner for each plan. So deferring, I think, is probably fairly self-explanatory, but that's going to be a lot of the discipline in order to make progress. Second topic, I've had the privilege to do a lot of work with large groups, and as Bob said, a lot of people looks more like a mob than it does look like a great brain. So to create distributed cognition, you need to decide on a decision style. So for those of you who are attending, or for those of you who are preparing, other folks who are going to be in attendance, please take a moment to kind of settle on this, and we'll send the slides out. I'll link them in the doc. Collective cognition is difficult, just like a distributed database is difficult. It lives and dies on the protocol that you use to come to agreement. In distributed computing, we call it consensus. But in cognitive decision styles, consensus is absolutely the worst form of agreement. So generally, there's a continuum where teams either work in tell, a single authoritative decision maker stating their decision and all people follow. This is also seen as dictatorship. Not great for collaboration, but good if you need to have a fast motion. Consult, one authoritative decision maker consults with 3 to 4 experts to make a great decision. This is generally a really powerful place, and you'll see most high-performing organizations function primarily around consult. Delegate, which is kind of recursive, it kicks this whole continuum off to somebody else to make their decision about how they're going to do this. Consent. Something along the lines of a majority rule, but with room for not having the tyranny of the majority. but being able to have committed people say like, I absolutely can't agree with this. So the bar for withholding consent generally should be high. Consent is withholdable, but if we don't withhold our consent, we act as if we absolutely vehemently agreed with the decision. So one of the conditions of consent is if you are part of a consent decision, you will not be the cause of failure. You will act as a driver of success for the decision. And finally, consensus. And again, sorry, I see that Dan Applequist disagrees with the framing. It's fine, right? You can put in different words that point at the same meaning vector, but the framing here of the concept is no authoritative decision maker. Everyone must agree, and any new member can prevent the decision. You've all seen this in your companies. When you see consensus-driven teams, often people get really frustrated. They say, oh my God, we can't seem to get started. We just decided this last month, somebody new joined this month, and now we're starting the entire process over again. Sometimes those kinds of systems can run for a long time. So somehow we need to agree on what is our decision-making style, figure out the labels that we want to use. But if we don't use the same protocol, much like a distributed database using different methods of coming to agreement, we will never progress. So please be thoughtful about decision style. We'll discuss this in the beginning of the strategy day. If you have things to contribute in terms of things that you can see work really, really well in large groups, please do so. And again, the words are less important to me than the actual behaviors. Let's make sure that as a culture, we have great words that we agree on that point to the great behaviors that we want to offer. Thanks for the commentary. Second to last, design. So we don't want a mob, right? We're likely to have 20 to 40 people in the strategy day. We may have more. We need to use technologies, good decision-making, distributed cognition technologies to make everybody's time awesome, right? So we want everyone to feel energetic, engaged, and satisfied by the end. So we're doing thoughtful design. Obviously, we're under the gun. We've got about 10 days to go. So anybody who is good at this, passionate about this, consider yourself invited to help me and others design the day. Small team working breakouts, important work, urgent timelines, making sure that we're not single-threaded like we're running a United Nations session where everybody waits in turn to speak, but we can actually get done hard work with incredibly intelligent people that we have in this group, making everyone smarter and leading to faster convergence. Pre-reads are going to be key. Many of you have worked in pre-read models. Our ideas are complicated. They don't come out of our mouths super well. Labels don't always work, but as we start to sit with people's thoughts that have been written out long form, we get a little smarter. One thing that's been useful for me in the past is to see where generally people already agree. That way we can save a lot of time and just feel good. Hey, we can agree to agree. Where do we diverge? And what bundles of priorities exist here? So I'll finish on this slide. This is a call for pre-reads. Bob and I chatted last week. I've talked with Brian as well. Those of us who are highly motivated on a particular topic, please consider volunteering for a pre-read. So something along the lines of, do you have observations on how they're working on how the work streams cluster together in practice? Do you have a strong perspective on measurable public commitments that we're accountable for? Do you have a strong perspective on where there are mutually exclusive needs for research, for resources? Ideally, a pre-read's only a one page. If we have an abundance of these, I can work on condensing them. But one of the beauties of a one-pager is it forces us to get our ideas out very crisply, and they're fairly easy to consume, even if we need to consume them on the fly, day of, right before we have an important meeting. So that's my invitation. I hope that's useful. Bob, I will hand it back to you, or take any comments or questions, or raised hands to volunteer. And I'll put my email address in the comments here. It's just sramg@linuxfoundation.org.
Great. Thanks, Sam. We've got about 50 seconds left unless folks want to run long. So I don't see any hands up, but I would also just echo Sam's call for volunteers. I think this is this foundation is, a community, right? It's what we ultimately make of it. And so your engagement on the 11th, as well as your preparation for that day, is certainly a way that we can all provide provide our perspective and talents in a way that's constructive towards the end of improving the state of the open source ecosystem. To that end, one of the pre-reads I guess I would propose is the technical vision PR that we've been having some small amount of dialogue back and forth on, but I think that's one document that we could certainly take in. It seems like we have either folks not looking at it or we have consensus. I remember several TAC members have already chimed in support, but I would also encourage you to go take a look at that PR again on the build up to next week in person. So one last reminder, the LF Member Summit is the few days ahead of the GB TAC meeting. Many of the TAC members will be physically present for the LF Member Summit, so there's certainly some opportunity for some preparation in the days that build up to next Friday. So I would encourage you, if you're in person, take advantage of that more broadly. And then finally, a reminder, this meeting next Friday is a closed session for GB members and TAC members. It's not open to anyone in the community. So just a reminder on that point. All right, with that, I appreciate everyone's time today. Look forward to your collaboration on preparing for next Friday and look forward to seeing everybody in person. Take care.